This past NAIC, I was on stream using a standard Tailwind team against a Trick Room team during round 8. I'd like to go over the set as I feel like it's a good example of how a fast-paced team like mine can defeat a Trick Room team. The team I'm using generally fares pretty poorly into Trick Room once it gets set up, and I don't really have any great defensive options into the Mimikyu and Tyranitar when my opponent has a speed advantage. Thus, my plan was either to deny Trick Room entirely on lead, or position in a way that would let me force the opponent to set Trick Room with their less offensive pieces on the field, such as their Scovillain, making it so that they would have to waste time switching to get into a sweeping position. I was very glad that I was able to showcase this strategy, especially against an excellent player like my opponent. Game 1, I lead Whimsicott and Floette, and am immediately in a great spot. The lack of any redirection on my opponent's end and the immense amount of damage I'm threatening makes them switch out the Mimikyu on the double up so that they can set up Trick Room later, causing their Corviknight, which is normally great into my two fairy types, to be on the cusp of getting knocked out. Even though this play was very telegraphed on my end, as it's my only real way to deny Trick Room should Mimikyu stay on the field, it's very hard not to protect with Tyranitar here, as eating a super effective Dazzling Gleam or Moonblast on your Mega Evolution is a very significant depletion of resources, and they may have feared that the switch to Corv was easily predictable. From here, two of my opponent's best pieces under Trick Room are either heavily damaged or heavily threatened, and because they don't have any sort of speed advantage, there's nothing that can really be done to stop a Moonblast and Dazzling Gleam to take 2 KOs. Now that Mimikyu and Excadrill are in front of Whimsicott and Floette, the ideal play would be to Tailwind and Dazzling Gleam. Given the play they end up making, Trick Room and Ironhead into Whim, this would have given me enough damage on both to put them in range of an attack from Basculegion, which locks up the game as I could just click Last Respect into Mimikyu and Moonblast into Excadrill. If they don't knock out Whim during the turn, for example if they Ironhead Floette in Trick Room, it gets to Encore and limit the opponent's options drastically. They basically have to knock out Whimsicott, which means that something is going to take damage that puts it in Basculegion range, and if I click Tailwind, this damage will be guaranteed. I ended up making the wrong play and clicking Moonblast into Mimikyu and Dazzling Gleam, which could have gone poorly if my opponent took 2 knockouts, but luckily they did not. Even if they had, I do still feel that I would have been favored, but this was a pretty big oversight on my part. Game 2 is an example of a game where Trick Room actually does go up, and we see the situation I mentioned prior where although the dimensions are twisted, no progress is being made. Rage Powder plus Trick Room is pretty telegraphed here, so I switch in Whimsicott on Basculegion slot. Because A, I don't want to knock out their redirector to give them a free switch into something more offensive like Tyranitar. B, my Basculegion is too good into their team to get burned. And C, I want Whimsicott to be able to threaten Encore into either of the Pokemon that just clicked status moves next turn. The turn goes as planned, I deal some chip damage with Dazzling Gleam, and Trick Room goes up. Encore into Mimikyu is very obvious because it seems so tempting to reverse Trick Room immediately, especially for a team as fast-paced as mine. Mimikyu getting Encored is both horrible for my opponent and easily preventable on their end. Knowing this, I Encore the Scovillain, predicting that my opponent would recognize this and that Mimikyu would switch. I also didn't want Scovillain to potentially do damage to my Whimsicott or Floette with Overheat. This play also doesn't give my opponent any chance to bring in Tyranitar. Switching in on a Dazzling Gleam is extremely unsafe. This goes as planned, and the next turn, I can switch in Kingambit and protect Whimsicott to guarantee no significant damage is dealt by my opponent's Corviknight and Encored Scovillain. Mimikyu is switched in, and I'm thinking about the Scovillain that can switch in its place and burn my Kingambit if I hit it. I know Scovillain is pretty low on HP, and I also know that if Corviknight goes down, my Floette is going to be in an excellent position. Taking this into account, I figure that my Floette can deal with Mimikyu later, and I double up into the Corviknight to stop any setup shenanigans and deal a ton of damage. Now, everything on my opponent's team is in Floette knockout range, more or less. I finally knock out Scovillain on the next turn, as knocking out the redirector means that the opponent will have no tools to set up Trick Room again. I did this near the end of Trick Room as I have no problem with Scovillain being on the field during Trick Room itself. It simply sits and doesn't do much damage, which is the best case for me. I also launch a Moonblast into Corviknight to cover for a switch. Whimsicott has done its job at this point. Corviknight was in an awkward spot, and I didn't want to switch and take a Brave Bird on my Whimsicott slot, so I was okay with it fainting, but I was able to catch a Tyranitar switch in, which now puts it in range of a Floette Gleam later on. Trick Room is over, and Floette Gleam plus King Gambit Ironhead into Mimikyu is a guaranteed win. I made a silly play here and doubled Mimikyu, thinking Gleam wouldn't kill Tyranitar for some reason, but it may have just been nerfs from being on stream. Luckily for me, my opponent did not low-kick my King Gambit, and I was able to win the set, moving on to 8-0. If you enjoyed this analysis or found it useful, please like and subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching.